Yes, welcome everybody. Thanks for joining us today. My name is Mirjam Harmelink, and I'm pleased to moderate this session on innovation policies, where we'll have three interesting presentations on different angles of innovative policies and approaches. Each speaker will present for 10 minutes and will answer questions at the end of the session during the questions and answer sessions. So please type your questions in the live Q&A box at any time. And also remember to include the name of the speaker to which you want to address the question. And also be aware that you should not use the tab discussion forum. And also the option on raising hands is not monitored. So please only use the live Q&A chat box. And should you have any problems, technical problems, then you can approach live support, the live support icon, and you will they will see if you can help you out. So then I would now first like to introduce the first speaker or speakers. That will be Nico, Jabin, and Robert Rutherfoord of the Department for Business, Energy, and Industrial Strategy. And they will be presenting something on a project they have been working on for the last 2 years. Please, Nico and Robert, the floor is yours, or the screen is yours.
Thank you. I'll be speaking first when handing over to Nico. Nico and I both worked on the evaluation program, developing an evaluation response over the last couple of years. I've subsequently moved on to evaluating Global Challenges Research Fund, so I've still got a keen interest in innovation. And so we're just going to give an account about what the key features of our approach has been and how it developed. So go to the next slide. So I'll just say a few words about the context of the Energy Innovation Programme. This is the UK's major investment in energy innovation, which is represents about £500 million, which ran from 2016 and finishes, I believe, this month. Actually, it has for our subsequent programmes. This was like, and it's invested in 74 programs, which contain over 450 projects. So it's a very complex program, and it operates in six key technology themes, which range from like renewable energy, smart technologies, nuclear, industry and CCS, built environment. It involves projects ranging for anything from the Energy Entrepreneurs Fund to hydrogen for heat and feasibility studies for advanced modular reactors. There's a huge range of stuff. And in essence, the evaluation response has been built from scratch. In the predecessor programs, there was a lot of monitoring going on, but not a strong evaluation function. And this function has been built incrementally. And go to the next slide. So just kind of some of the objectives that these will come across as quite familiar objectives that evaluation will have, but with a small staff, a small source and a commissioning budget, we need to hit all of these. So we need to show the overall achievements of the programs. That's very important in a policy environment where you're trying to build the confidence of stakeholders that what you're doing is making a difference. Enable technology-specific decisions, so enable evidence to inform the next steps in technology development. You need to improve the processes by which programs are managed and commissioned and evaluated. Support communications, which relates to that first aim again. So case studies are important for communications, and provide the long-term evidence for energy innovation and sort of help design future programs. So, when we were thinking about how to explain what the key elements of this evaluation approach have become, and we sort of explain it in sequence. So first of all, in developing a set of comprehensive and robust key performance indicators was like the first step in the early years of the programme. This has been rolled out incrementally. Nico will speak a bit more about the experience of that shortly. So in order to sort of enable to sort of describe and account for the outputs of the programme, that's priority number one. Then there was a process of commissioning priority programme evaluations. So out of the 70 programmes, there was a prioritisation process by which we decided which programmes were we going to learn the most from, and we've commissioned a number of evaluations, such as the Energy Entrepreneurs Fund, Hydrogen for Heat, and many others. Third in the sequence is synthesis. So there are now opportunities to synthesize these evaluations across themes, and that's some work that Nico's working on now. And we describe insights as an extra, but this is a very important element of our evaluation approach, in that in order to provide sort of closer to real-time feedback, we initiate focused projects to promote learning on particular subjects in particular themes to feed back into the policy cycle and into commissioning. So, and now over to you, Nico.
Hi, I just want to give a little bit more detail on each of the 4 points that Robert just went through. First of all, on the key performance indicators, so we developed a set of key performance indicators that all 450 projects in the portfolio had to complete on an annual basis. They cover inputs, outputs, and the longer term outcomes, at least in a sort of prospective way. They reflect obviously the portfolio aims, but we developed a set that sort of covers the range of what we want to achieve, but that projects select specifically to what they're actually doing. So if a project doesn't actually want to reduce the cost of energy, which is quite likely, then they obviously wouldn't report on that, but others will. One of the good things about our KPIs is that we are planning to collect them for 3 years after the program closes. And the other aspect that's worth mentioning is that we have moved now to a centralized data collection. For the first few years, data collection was built into the program management. That hasn't worked incredibly well, particularly in getting the data together, but we now have a centralized collection. Second bit I want to talk about are the individual program evaluations. At the beginning, when the portfolio was set up, we went through a process of prioritization, and we put all programs into 3 categories. There would either be, the evaluation would either be led by us for the most important programs. They would be led by the program lead with our support for important but not quite that important programs, and where programs were particularly in the early stages of technology development, where it's often feasibility studies, we would just collect KPIs. There is a sort of 4th category where the program delivery is actually outsourced, and then the evaluation would usually sit with that external party. One thing that has worked quite well is that the evaluation approach needs to be developed at the time the business case is developed for the programs. That focuses minds. We have also started to combine programs for evaluation purposes where that's feasible. It's something we want to do more of. We have often outsourced the scoping to a third party because of resource pressures. We'll come back to that to reflect on that. And I mean, the evaluations look at all the usual things: processes, outcomes, impact, and the economic side. One thing that's worth mentioning is that, and I guess that's quite usual across other similar types of portfolios, that our evaluations are almost all theory-based, and that's because counterfactual approaches are quite often not feasible, but that's worked quite well. The last two aspects I wanted to discuss a little bit more in a little bit more detail are the synthesis, which, as Robert was saying, in time to develop. One is the idea is to bring all these portfolio reports together and with the KPIs and provide an overarching narrative. In the Insights program, where we go to programs on an ongoing basis and try to extract information for what's happened so far and what the key insights have been that we might be able to share. What's worked well is the KPIs have worked really well. We're preparing our first report on this. The prioritization has worked well in enabling us to deliver important program evaluations. And most of these are underway now. And the use of theories of change to develop program evaluations has also been quite successful. We're quite happy about that. Robert, do you want to go back to the lessons?
I'll just conclude by commenting on a few lessons learned, which we expand on in the paper, which is on the conference website. Some of these may seem quite obvious, but they are quite important. I suppose the first being that one of the lessons we learned is that alongside prioritization, resource planning is very important. So it takes a lot of resource to manage evaluations, and as well as initiating the work, you need to build the team at a good pace. We did build it from like 1.5 people to about 6 or 7 people now. It took time. And the second bullet's all around this issue about culture change and culture building, capacity building within the wider organisation. So long-term tasks to build skills, expectations, even changing language about how people talk about evaluation. The point about interim findings and comms is that like people don't want to wait for findings. They want to know now. Evaluations necessarily take a long time. You've got to find a way to square that circle. Portfolio evaluation is very important to take a wider look at processes such as procurement management, business case development, evaluation planning, and lastly, evaluators work in parallel with program management, project management professionals. We're both trying to achieve the same thing. Working well with them together has been very important in BASE to kind of help the monitoring, tie in with KPIs, with benefits management, and all that kind of stuff. So I'll finish there because we're running out of time. But there we go.
Thank you very much. Are there any questions on this presentation? We have room for a few questions. I don't see anything in the chat, so please post your questions in the chat. I don't see anything yet, but I have one question. And maybe you can tell me, because you said you've lessons learned, and my experience is that you usually learn from things that absolutely went wrong. So what did actually not work at all? So what you say, okay, don't do that again when you have such a large program. I can't hear you, and you have to unmute yourself, Nico. Oh
dear.
Yeah, I hear you. Oh, now you're on mute again.
Yep, we can hear you now.
You can hear me now?
Yeah.
Okay. One of the key things was about interim findings and communications. We've had a lot of demand from senior management to tell us something. You know, you've been doing this for 3 years now. You've been scoping, you've been setting up, you've been in the field, when can we learn something? And it's probably been one of the sort of shortcomings of our planning that our response for a long time was, we'll get back to you when the evaluations report. And for quite a few evaluations, that's actually after the program closes. And so there was some understandable frustration about that. That's why we then set up this Insights program, which is almost a bit of a live, qualitative, almost comms program. Is there something that has happened that we can tell you now? And then it's not based on the evaluations in the field, it's based on discussions with program leads, with the projects, and that's worked reasonably well so far, although it has it does also take up resources that are quite scarce sometimes, so there's a bit of a counter pressure from that point.
There is one question from Andrew Reeves. What's your experience of how the robust evidence you have put together fits into the political process of government deciding which approaches technologies to support?
Shall I answer that briefly?
Yeah,
that's a very interesting and, on the face of it, simple question, but it's monstrously complicated, partly because the way Bayes chooses which technologies to support is influenced by a very structured process called the ENAS, which is called the Energy Innovation Needs Assessment, which is partly a modelling exercise. But I would say that the evaluations play an important role in final decisions about how to implement those kinds of recommendations. So the Energy Entrepreneurs Fund, for example, is a very popular program. It's gone into its 8th wave. I think the evaluation of that gave confidence to kind of invest more and invest more quickly. When if we discover opposite evidence, the opposite happens. Programs, particular technologies get pared back a little bit. So that's a short answer to a very complicated question.
Okay, thank you very much, and thanks again, Nico and Robert, for this interesting presentation and insights into your program. Then we move on to the next presentation by Andreas Ligtvoet, a principal consultant at Technopolis in Amsterdam, with expertise in the green and blue economy. I didn't know what blue economy is, so maybe you can explain that a little bit. And I was also intrigued by the fact that you're a member of the World Future Studies Federation. I've never heard of before, but maybe you can tell a little bit about that as well. So I give you the floor.
Thank you very much, Mirjam. I hope everybody can hear me. Yeah, the blue economy, since you asked the questions, of course. The blue economy is everything that has to do with water. And as you may know, or some of you may know, there is this really interesting link between what can be achieved on land in terms of sustainability and what can be achieved in the seas. And there is, let's say, maybe some more room in the water to achieve sustainable development in terms of food production than there is on land, at least in the Netherlands, for example. And regarding the World Future Studies Federation, it's a federation of researchers who are interested in what's going on in the future and to sort of use the best methods to think about that. But that was not at all what I was going to talk to you about. I was going to talk to you about a couple of projects that we've done on, obviously, energy and the insights that we've learned from that, or surprises maybe. And I thought the perspectives from the Netherlands may be interesting for other people to hear and raise some debates. And I must say that I felt I had to show you this slide about systems thinking because it sort of explains the surprise or the interesting thoughts. Well, the thoughts that we have concerning, where would you expect the energy transition to take place, right? You can split up a system into subcomponents or subsystems that you can split into components at a lower level. And the interesting thing of such a system perspective, system view, is that every component is sort of responsible for itself and only is partially related or sort of controlled by a higher or a lower element of the system. And the reason I say this is because governance can be seen in such a way is that you have, for example, at the top, the national level that splits down into provincial levels and splits down into municipal, local levels. And it is good to remember that, like James Scott put forward, for example, many people, of course, have, but that if you look like a state, if you look at the highest level of the system, you will only see a very abstract vision of what the energy transition looks like. And you can only maybe count windmills or square meters or square kilometers of PV panels. And you will fail to see what's going on at the local level. So, at least from my perspective, but I'm very happy to share these thoughts with you, discuss with you. It makes sense to tackle the energy transition at the municipal level, because, as I said, at a higher level there's a lack of granularity. There's little insight in what happens on the ground, what the local interests are, and there is little ability to look at tailor-made solutions. Okay, so on to the evaluation bit. We did a midterm evaluation of the European Regional Development Fund operational program for the south of the Netherlands, which you see on the map here, and a specific subcomponent 4F, which was all meant to speed up the energy efficiency, increase local clean tech competitiveness, strengthening the system. All, from my perspective, interesting, good goals that would underpin the energy transition. And to the great surprise of the sort of the organizing authority, there was underspending in this program. It was focused on the built environment, which indeed is a large user of energy and receives very little attention in the Netherlands. There was attention to smart rollout, and there was this whole thought about the municipalities, like I tried to explain in the previous slides, being the launching customers. So the whole idea behind this program was that municipalities should know better, but they didn't. And there were several reasons. The graph on the right-hand side showed the involved parties or the leading parties of the projects that were subsidized. And apologies for the Dutch, the lowest one, gemeente, which is municipality, was the number of projects being led by municipality, which was only 5. And you see that small medium enterprises is the large bar where the sort of the largest drivers of this whole program. So what went wrong? And to start with the bottom bullet point, even large cities in the Netherlands, and of course it depends a little bit what a large city is, but several 100,000 inhabitants do not have the know-how nor the personnel to actually manage such a project and to really deal with all the intricacies of the energy transition. So theoretically, the thought was good that at the municipal level, this program should be picked up. But most municipalities don't have people around who can manage this, or if they do, it's only for a part of their time that they have, because they also have to do the public greening and garbage collection. And oh, by the way, we also do energy. There was a sort of a mix in what is exactly the goal of this program, and it focused on rollout. But there's an interesting mix, or an interesting sort of dichotomy between rollout and innovation. If you have a program that focuses on innovation, people think of new technologies. But if you want these technologies to be rolled out in municipalities around, well, everywhere, the Netherlands, it's not the sort of technical innovations that really play an important role. It's the social innovations that play a role. But if your mind is fixed on wanting to count beautiful technical installations, then you will not think of, and you will not ask for, all those innovations that require, for example, citizens to come together, to work together in a street, and to build these, to further roll out these innovations. And one of the mistakes that was made in this program was that rather than asking for the societal benefit of these projects, there was a request for a business case. And here you see that wording in calls for projects matter, because business case is something that maybe small, medium enterprises or large enterprises, which is the middle bar, groot bedrijf, in the graph on the right-hand side. They would like to respond to business cases because that's something they want to roll out in different cities. But if you are in a municipal council, you may not be that interested in rolling out across different cities that are not your own city. Anyway, so the whole idea of this program, this program was positive, but lacked some implementation in terms of, well, the right wording, the right focus, and did not consider the availability of qualified personnel. And now we're moving on to a situation where, well, in the Netherlands, we're trying to organize our response to the energy transition challenges with the so-called regional energy systems, energy regions, where we actually do understand that the local level may not be the best level to achieve all goals, because certain larger infrastructures need coordination. And so on the left-hand side, you see what in literature could be called a type 1 arrangement, which is really the typical hierarchical division that I showed to you on the first slide: a national, provincial, local. And what is called a type 2 arrangement is goal-oriented, mission-oriented arrangement, which is more like a network organization, where the different partners from different municipalities come together, but as well coordinated or helped with representatives from the provincial level, with water authorities, network operators. They all come together and try to fix and promote the energy transition. The problem here is that all the mandates for making decisions still lie at the local level, still lie in the type 1 arrangement, and it'll be a very interesting exercise in the coming years to see how these regions actually fix the fact that there is no clear authority, no clear mandate within this structure, and how they will resolve this, given the fact that there will always be these communication channels between sort of the old ways of organizing things and the new ways of organizing things. And my reason for sharing this with you is that this will undoubtedly present all kinds of challenges, how to evaluate the effectiveness of these regions and to check how to approach this in different regions who will probably have solved their problems in different ways. This is a summary of what is going on in the Netherlands, and I invite you to get in touch to talk about this now or at a later stage after this conference. Thank you.
Thank you, Andreas. Very interesting. And as I'm from the Netherlands as well, I do recognize this, and I've been working for local municipalities, so I do recognize how difficult it is also regarding resources and trying to communicate between the different levels. Are there people, did you, maybe the first question to you, Andreas, but I also want participants, is this also something which is at hand in other countries? Is it, because it all looks very complicated and very Dutch, polderen as we know it. So maybe people can post some observations in the chat, but Andreas, maybe you can already elaborate maybe a little bit on, do you know if how this is organized in other countries, and if there are some good practices which in the Netherlands we could take from other countries?
Yeah, a good question. And I look at the information that we get as presenters to see that at least in the UK this also happens. Now, my hunch is that from this systems logic, this must also be going on in other countries. However, I've not compared these systems. I was just thinking that in any country there must be this sort of problem of which level to fix problems, the energy transition issues in. And yeah, I hope that other countries may be clearer about where the authority lies, where the mandate lies, and how they sort of organize this network type of arrangement.
Okay.
So yeah.
I don't see any questions in the chat, but maybe some people need to rethink it, and we'll at the end we can come back. Thank you, Andreas, again for this interesting presentation on the Dutch insights. Then we move on to our third speaker in this session, which is Andrew Reed. He's a senior lecturer in the Energy and Sustainable Development at Montfort University in Leicester in the UK. And he will give us some interesting insights on his research into behavioral change in the building sector. Andrew, the floor is yours.
That's great. Thanks, Mirjam. Okay, hi everybody. So what I'm going to present for you is just a short offering about a project I'm involved with called eTeacher, which is a Horizon 2020 project with multiple partners across Europe, which is looking to improve energy efficiency in buildings through the development of a custom web-based app that you could use on a smartphone or on other devices, and that tries to support and motivate people to save energy in the buildings that they interact with, either ones they live in or ones that they work in. The project's it's a 3-year project. We've got 3 more months to run. As you might imagine, it's been heavily disrupted by COVID-19 and all the responses to that. So I'm not here to report a shining success story of a project that has been easy to evaluate, that's gone really well. This is kind of akin to what Mirjam was highlighting about how we can learn from some of the things that don't quite work, and perhaps there's some learning around trying to make sense of a project that has been run in a very non-standard time. So let me just advance. Okay, so just before I go into it, I just like you to kind of imagine your way into what we're trying to do. Now, obviously, we're all working at home now, so it's a little bit different. But if you imagine, I'm sure most people listening would, before the pandemic, have been working in an office, or you might even imagine your own home as a work environment as well. And think about any energy efficiency issues that may be prevalent where you are. So maybe certain times or certain spaces, there are issues of overheating. Maybe some people, others in the building, I don't know, are leaving the lights on. So there are ways in which that building isn't operating quite as efficiently as it could in terms of what you're trying to achieve in that building. Would you personally install an app on your phone that would help you resolve those problems? So just consider that. Would you go, oh yeah, actually, I would do that. And do you think it would work? Do you think it would reduce energy use in your building? You might also think not only you might do it. We're all here because we care about energy. Would other people that you know who use that building do it as well? So that's kind of a trigger to kind of get you thinking about the dynamics of this. The incentive that I'll go on to explain is that the app does provide tailored information about what is happening in that building and tries to motivate you to use it. So that hopefully would make it more likely people would give it a go. So just to kind of by way of the kind of context, buildings account for large amount of energy consumption in Europe. So this figure is from a few years ago, but it hasn't changed significantly. So it's saying around 40%. So there's a lot to be gained by improving how efficiently we use energy in buildings. And that's not just about energy. There's also about the experience of being in buildings and the health and well-being benefits that can come from that as well. So that's kind of the rationale for this work. So some of the thinking around how to motivate people to change their energy use in this way. So we were using a model called Combi, which was developed as a kind of comprehensive framework for understanding behavior change by looking at multiple behavior change frameworks. And it highlights that behavior of a person relates to, is influenced by, and it influences their capability to do the behavior, their opportunity, which is provided by the physical and the social environment they find themselves in, and their motivation, which could be a consciously held motivation, I want to do this, or it could be their habits, it could be their emotions. So with that in mind and linking to what we're doing, many people wouldn't be motivated to install an app to save energy, but maybe the gamification element, making it something fun to do, something competitive to do, could do that. In terms of opportunity, an app like this offers ways to connect people who use the same building to each other, to share information, and also to have that better information about what's happening in the building, which again can be empowering if you know what's going on. So we trying to enhance opportunity and also capability by the app inviting you to do behaviors that are within your gift to do. So one thing we looked at quite early on was what behaviors would be a good fit. I'll come to that shortly. There is potential for this sort of approach. So one example is a serious game called Energy Chickens, where you had to try and keep a chicken in good health. And if you failed, the chicken would get very ill and die. And that led to a 13% reduction in energy use where that was tested. So there's opportunity in this approach. So what we did through the project, so we have multiple partners in the project from across Europe. Our purpose was to devise this web-based app and online platform that would encourage and support building users to save energy in a range of ways. So that could be about giving them information about what's happening in terms of energy consumption, heating consumption, movements of various sensors we plan to put in our buildings, and also challenging them to do certain behaviors day in, day out, and having league tables and things within the app so they could see how they were progressing and compare to others. That was the basic idea. It was developed to be tried out in 3 countries and in 12 specific buildings in those countries. In Romania, we had 4 residential tower blocks. In the UK, we had a school and an office building. In Spain, as you can see, 2 healthcare centres, 2 schools, a residential building and an office. So very different types of building, which at the outset, we were thinking, will this work? You know, can we develop something that is actually relevant and works well for the different types of users and stakeholders in these different buildings? And obviously one key contrast is that a residential building, you just have the householder, whereas something like an office owned by a local authority, you actually have people in an energy management and building management role who are there to know a bit more about energy and to, you know, dive into a bit more detail into these issues, in contrast as well to people who just use the building as their workplace day in, day out. So lots of different users, lots of different contexts. We were seeing if this could work in all of them. So participation and engagement was a really big part of our project design. So we were drawing upon some insights by the likes of Les Robinson here, saying that behaviour change projects, if designed by experts, so-called experts, often fail or underperform. Why is that? Because the people at the sharp end, the stakeholders whose behaviour is going to be changed or are going to be involved in delivery, have never bought into the process. It wasn't their idea. They didn't help shape it, and they didn't buy in to take part. Or also, you don't have good insight into the real situation on the ground if you're designing something from afar. And that could be at the outset, but also that could be ongoing. So actually checking with people if what you're proposing is actually going to work or not. So as a counterpoint to that, you could use something called user-centered design, where you work alongside the end users, ideally from the very beginning, to co-design the intervention. Now, we couldn't do it in this project from the very beginning. The project was conceived of without the end users, but once it was underway, we had meetings with users in all the buildings. So we had an initial meeting to introduce the project and what it was about, and the different ideas for the app. And then we also had 3 feedback forums, which is one of the approaches recommended by Robinson. He calls it a brains trust, where the stakeholders come together and give their views, give their feedback, and hopefully through that process buy into it a lot more as well. They feel they have a stake in it. What we found across our 12 buildings for those first 2 things, the meeting and feedback forums, we had 112 and 119 participants. So a good level of engagement, giving feedback on how they wanted this app to work. So we used that engagement, and then the members of the team who were developing the app got to work to develop it and had little bits of interim feedback along the way. And then things started to get disrupted. So we launched a very early version in early 2020, pre-pandemic, but we hadn't ironed out all the glitches in the software at that point. I'll come to that later on. So it wasn't a perfect version at that point. October 2020, by which time all the various countries were, you know, in and out of lockdown, and the way that people were using their buildings was changing quite a lot. We collected data on usage of the app over a 3-month period, October to January, just gone, and that's actual, you know, are people logging in, which functions are they using, so we can actually kind of see what's happening with the app using that data. And then to understand the early sense of impact, you know, we're not in a position to give a full story yet. So we've got that logged app usage data. We've got the building sensors in each building, which have been logging energy consumption over this period. So we can look at that. We had an interim survey over email with our contacts in all of the buildings. And also as part of that interim survey process, we had informal conversations on the phone with the more engaged contacts for each building as well to see how things were going. So I'm just going to share kind of what we've learned through that process. And so what I'll say first up, in terms of energy consumption, we're not really in a position to give meaningful results in a nutshell. So, you know, we had before and after data, we had kind of comparing users in spaces in buildings that had engaged with the app versus those that had not, to do a comparison. But the changes brought about by COVID have been so disruptive in terms of, you know, obviously office buildings have not been used or have barely been used. The schools have gone out of use, back into use, out of use again. Households are generally spending more time at home. So all the patterns have been changed. And so we can't really meaningfully talk about the impact it's had in terms of measured energy data. In terms of user engagement, we've had 49 users sign up and register and link their account to one of the buildings that they're in, and that covers 10 of the 12 buildings. So there's 2 of the buildings where we actually didn't end up with active users. And then looking at people using the app over a 1 month period from December to January, so a little after the launch, we can get a sense of, you know, how many of them are actually actively using it. So they've actually logged on over that 1 month, and we found 18 people, and that's across 9 of the 12 buildings, and the maximum of 3 per building. So it's a small number of people per building who've been actively using it over that period. And you know, I've reported a bit on engagement and energy use, and you know, one message I'm drawing from this is that to be able to tell the whole story of this project, which we're not ready to do yet, but we need all of this. So we need to know both the measured energy use, but also where we can't trust that data, or at least without some contextualization, self-reported energy use and changes in behavior are very important as well. In the same way, we can measure engagement with the app, but likewise, we could really do with some self-reported engagement as well. What are people going to tell us about how they've used it, what they found frustrating or useful, and what changes it's triggered?
Andrew, I already have one question. Maybe we can already answer that, because Nico asks us, you have 94 users out of how many possible, and did you have any initial thoughts of what you might expect?
Sure. Well, 12 buildings. I mean, at the very least, you know, the 120 who attended the initial meetings, we would have expected to go on to successfully use the app. We expected those people to be almost like a, you know, a seed who would engage other people in their building. So I would have, I could probably dig out a figure from our project plans, but I think we'd be talking the high hundreds to low thousands that we were hoping would actually use the app. So very low numbers compared to what we might have hoped for. Okay, so that's just kind of highlighting the kinds of information that we will be pulling together more comprehensively over the coming months, but this is what we know at the moment. And in terms of the user experience, you know, some of the reasons why you're seeing, you know, few people using it. When I said we did a survey a month or 2 ago over email, so going out to over 100 people, we had 8 people respond, and 5 of them had not used the app at all. And the reasons for that were either they had failed to create an account, or they'd made their account, but then they couldn't log in successfully. So there were some technical problems that happened early in 2020, and essentially people tried and they gave up. You know, they were finding it wasn't working for them. 3 people from our survey had actually used it successfully, and they actually said they were having quite a positive experience. And one of them reported a change in behavior, which was basically being more diligent at turning lights off at the end of a workday in their building. So that's the kind of the positive piece. Those, you know, that small number of active users who are reporting back. From the phone conversation we had with some of our initially engaged users, they were reporting that they found the app very, very complex. It was trying to do a lot. You know, it was providing live feedback. It was had this kind of carbon emissions representation. It had a league table. It was suggesting behaviors. There's quite a lot in there. So it was complex. It didn't work at first. There were a few technical hitches with getting it going, and there's just a lot of information in there. So those are some of the negative experiences we've noted. And what I wonder, I think we might explore, you know, over the coming months, is this to do with the different role of the users? Is it that people are more close to being an energy manager, who are more aware of the nuances of building energy and really want to dive into the detail of finding it brilliant because they've got, you know, new levels of detail they can use to understand their building, whereas people who just use it to live in or go to work in don't need that level of detail. They need something a lot more simple and more engaging, and it isn't working for them. That's the sort of thing we're going to be exploring over the coming months through some further feedback forums and surveys. So this isn't a story of great success so far. What does it highlight? So I'd say the thing from the very beginning about kind of project ownership, you know, almost by definition with this kind of funding stream model and the way you convene sort of high-level partners to deliver a project, the users on the ground weren't consulted. You know, it came as a surprise to them. They were part of a European project about saving energy. Changing that is partly about the culture of people who devise projects, but it's about the way that projects are funded and conceived of in the first place to enable that. Priorities amidst the pandemic has been an important issue. You know, the healthcare centres, the schools, at this point, they're saying, well, we're not going to be encouraging our staff to use this app. We've got other things we need to be doing right now, a lot more important. So getting further usage in many of these settings in the coming months is going to be very difficult for us. There was also, I've not dwelled on it a lot here, but we faced a lot of challenges around the kind of high effort to do a kind of technical behavior change approach of installing monitoring equipment, metering equipment, all these different buildings. It created no end of headaches. And in terms of being replicable beyond this application, you know, it suggests that it would be really problematic, you know, that you wouldn't expect people who, let's say an organization that wants to sign up to this sort of service would first have to install lots of equipment. It looks like the kind of level of complexity of equipment that the project was using is perhaps too much to be viable for a wider rollout. We also had privacy concerns. So one of our 12 buildings, the tenants basically said, we're not going to take part. We don't trust that we're going to be monitored in our homes and having this data shared. So privacy was a concern as well for this type of approach. So I think this highlights some general issues that could be relevant for other projects. I'd also highlight that, you know, evaluating something like this when your operating environment changes is very difficult. And the thing I'm grateful for is we've got the combination of the plan in advance, but also a bit of flexibility to draw on different complementary data sources to give us the best picture we can get. So we're not just relying upon measured energy use, we're also going to be looking at self-reported measures, combining the qualitative and the quantitative to get that richer story of what's happening. So we don't fully know yet, but it doesn't look promising is the headline, but there's still stuff that we can learn from that experience. So thank you.
Thank you, Andrew, for this interesting insight into struggling with a project in COVID. There is a question from Olivia in the chat. She thanks you and she has two questions. How did you handle access to energy data? And to what extent the elements of the app features to the diverse drive energy efficiency were more well suited to some stakeholder types than others?
Okay, so energy data. So we were, because the building owners were participants in the project, essentially we weren't having to do anything like going through utility companies or anything like that. You know, so you know, Nottingham City Council provided us with the data for the energy being used in their buildings, and we enhanced that by installing kind of more kind of granular monitoring equipment. So in fact, one of the challenges was that the existing energy data for these buildings, you know, wasn't at all standardized. So you'd have one particular building we're interested in, and their gas meter is actually connected to another building next door that's owned by the council as well. But for us to understand what's happening in that building, we needed extra metering. And again, it's just this point of, you know, I guess at the outset we had this kind of vision of, what if we had a sort of one-size-fits-all platform where you could pull in the data of what's happening in different buildings and then tailor a support package to suit? And we find that the existing monitoring equipment is so non-standard that I don't know, it barely looks viable at the moment. You know, maybe in the future if we go towards more smart metering and they all talk to each other in some way, but that was that. And in terms of the second question, which was about different building user types, no, I think I can't say for sure yet, but I think a lot of what the app gives you is a lot more detail than you would wish for as, you know, as an office worker or a householder. So I suspect that could be one of the things going on in terms of who's being engaged, but I can't say for sure yet because we've not matched the data of who is actively engaged in using the app yet.
Okay, thank you very much. I don't. Oh yeah, so that was one question from Olivia. There's also still one question from to Andreas from the previous presentation. The question is, it's really interesting. It's deciding in deciding what the right level. It's a question from Tina. What the right level of to fit the problem? You highlighted the lack of capacities or, in principle, skills at the local level. Do you think types and scale of technology or energy systems are also important? Are there other key factors which help us think about such a of which level action should happen at?
Ooh, yeah.
Ooh.
I guess part of the answer is indeed that it all depends on the local context, right? But I try to explain. So if you're in a municipality that also has industry within its boundaries, or a large port with all kinds of flows, then the requirements at the municipal level of understanding is a lot higher. If you are an average municipality somewhere in the country, the requirements may be a lot lower. You need to understand a little bit about buildings, for example, and that a lot of energy goes around in buildings, and that just putting solar panels up is not going to solve your energy problem. You know, you need to insulate and use the app that the previous speaker was just talking about. So it's certainly the where it takes place matters. You do see, at least in the Netherlands, you do see that municipalities are picking up this challenge, and they do understand that they have to involve more and more experts in their team to actually make changes happen within their boundaries. So it's moving in the right direction, and more skilled people are being involved in municipalities. But yeah, it does depend on the local context.
Okay, thank you, Andreas, for this extended answer. We have 3 minutes left, and I don't see any questions left in the chat box. So I suggest that we close this session. Thanks again, all speakers, for your interesting presentations, and for the participants. You probably are now all aware that the presentations and the papers can be found on the website. We will now have a 15-minute break before we move to the closing keynote panel presentations and some networking, and before the conference ends at 2 o'clock. So thank you all very much, and hopefully see you in 15 minutes.